Welcome back, friends. This is Straight Lines with Elizabeth Kaiser, Sunday evenings at 8 p.m., and I am so excited. We have an incredible guest with us this evening, Dr. Paul Clayton. But hey, guys, I'm going to do something a little bit different this week. I tell you what, we've got Dr. Paul Clayton, and I'm going to play an interview. This is incredible. He's going to be talking for about 28 minutes, and I want you to be sitting down. I want you to be taking notes. I want you to be calling your friends and family and get as many listeners as you can, because you are going to be riveted in your seat with what this Dr. Paul Clayton has to talk about. He is a leading health expert and speaker of 44 countries. So here we go. We're going to talk to Paul Clayton. Here's the interview. Take a listen. I tell you, with those credentials, there's not too often that we get aghast with the caliber and the credentials and the gravitas as Dr. Paul Clayton. Dr. Paul Clayton, are you there?
Yes, I am, and thank you for the introduction. People who know me know that I don't do gravitas very much.
I can't tell you what an honor and what a privilege it is to have you, definitely on the show. And I mean it. That wasn't just some kind of rhetoric to introduce you, but I totally mean it when I say, the guest today is somebody who mirrors the passion I've had for as long as I can remember. And what was interesting, just this past Thanksgiving of all days, I actually talked to Dr. Paul Clayton. That's when I first met him on the phone on the morning of Thanksgiving, when he and I were connecting actually on WhatsApp. And I said, it'd be a lot easier if you just called me if you can. And I thought, well, you can't get what you don't ask for. And lo and behold, it was like a half hour later, and here comes a phone call. And you were calling me from Florida, weren't you?
I was. That's my home when I'm in America. Okay. But I live in different parts of the world. May I hasten to add, at the same time.
I understand. So now, just to give you a little bit of a backdrop before we get into the nitty-gritty of health and what Dr. Clayton stands for, he has authored a few books. One of those is called, and I love the title of this book, Dr. Clayton. You told me to call you Paul on the phone. I'm going to keep you Dr. Clayton on air. I think that's more appropriate. Pharmageddon. I love that. Did you come up with the title of that book, Pharmageddon?
As far as I know, but I think it's parallel evolution, because a few other people came out with the same title or very similar titles around about the same time. Okay. So it was an idea that was floating around, and a few of us tapped into it. Okay.
And another book you've authored is Strengthening Your Immune System, and another one is called Health Defense.
Yep, there's a bunch. I write a lot of books. I write a lot of scientific papers. I teach. I give lectures. That's my life, pretty much.
Okay. All right. I'm going to say something that actually you taught me this just a few days ago on the phone, and I think you and I almost reiterated the same words at the same time, because you took the words right out of my mind when you said a perfect storm, and I was thinking there's 3 inflection points that create this perfect storm, and it is the storm, and it is and I know you would use different words, but I'm going to identify those 3, and then I want you to really delve into that. But it's our toxic food supply is the number 1 variable. The number 2 variable is our just horrific, and I can't underscore the emphasis on that word horrific, sedentary lifestyle in our country. And the 3rd variable would be our technology. And I'm not talking about these AI tools that could revolutionize medicine and make us healthier. I'm talking about our phones that we're all staring at 24/7. We're never getting off our phones, always staring at somebody else's reality, and never getting into our own reality. And of course, when we're staring at somebody else's reality on our phones, guess what we're doing? We're pretty much sitting down, aren't we? And those 3 variables that have converged have created this perfect storm. And if you would, just tell us about those thoughts and what you had devoted your life to doing.
Well, each one of those issues, to really get into the weeds, would probably take an hour. We've only got 30 minutes to cover all 3 and whatever other talking points you have. So I'll skate across the top, but hopefully that'll give your listeners an idea of where some of the current research is at. The first thing is the modern diet. And, I like what Robert Kennedy is doing. I don't agree with all the detail, but I think he's put his finger on it when he makes the point that the medical industry and the pharmaceutical industry, which is who owns the medical industry really, have gone hell-for-leather down this road of what is called rational pharmacology, lock and key mechanisms designed to, well, they're really the equivalent to Paul Ehrlich's magic bullets. And we've developed so many of these over the last 50 years. So the pharmaceutical industry has gotten rich and fat. It's designed all of these very specific, very toxic molecules, while in the background, public health has declined. No matter how you measure it, according to almost any metric, it's gotten worse. So there's a huge mismatch there. We've been shooting our magic bullets in the wrong direction. And in fact, probably we shouldn't have been shooting magic bullets at all. We should have been providing safety nets, support systems for people who are very badly let down. And I would put it even more strongly, chronically poisoned by what is now the modern industrial diet. Now, there's a guy called Barry Popkin who coined the phrase the nutrition transition. He's at the University of South Carolina, I believe. And what he talks about is the way in which, really since the 1950s, and increasingly, we've moved away from natural foods that you could hunt or fish or farm or forage, towards ultra-processed foods. Basically, the human equivalent of the kibble that we feed our cats and dogs, and which, by the way, is poisoning them too. When you look at public health, the changes that have occurred since this dietary change was made, what you see is that I could give you a list of maybe 80, maybe 90 chronic degenerative, non-communicable diseases, all the important ones, all of which have become more common, all of which are occurring in younger and younger age groups. And really, there is only one conclusion you can draw from this, that the modern diet is in fact chronically poisoning us. Now, as a pharmacologist, what I'm most concerned with is trying to understand how these modern foods are poisoning us. And this is where my view and the people around Bobby Kennedy, we slightly diverge. They have been looking at additives that they think are so dangerous. And I'm not denying the fact that they make a contribution. But what is really harming us, and where you can look at mechanism of action of different foods and food extracts and what their effects on the body are. What is really harming us are a lot of things that used to be important in the traditional diet and which have been taken away. So this is not a sin of commission, but it's really more a sin of omission. And working with other scientists and other companies all over the world, I've been able to put together, or I've participated in the design of a number of antidotes, replacement strategies, if you like, which put these things back into the diet and undo the damage that the modern diet does. So that's a problem for adults, even more a problem for children, for infants, because they're made more vulnerable in many ways, particularly when they're in the womb. During pregnancy, the second and third trimester in particular, they're badly harmed by this modern diet. If their mom, and to their father to some extent, is eating this diet, their optimal development in utero is never going to be attained, and they're going to be condemned to reduced health expectancy and very likely a reduced life expectancy after birth. So this is a type of harm that has now become very widespread. It's endemic in North America and in those other countries which have followed the United States down this dietary hill. And it's to the point now where healthcare systems all over the world are being overwhelmed. We have made so many sick people, so many people with multiple pathologies, and those are complex, they're difficult to treat, they're time intensive, they take up a lot of expenditure as well. No economy is healthy enough to be able to continue with these trends. We have to move away from this crisis management type of medicine, which is what the pharmaceutical industry gives us, to something that is kinder, cheaper, and genuinely preventative. And that's where pharmaco-nutrition comes in. That's one part of the growing storm, because that has not yet happened. We and our children are still being exposed to this incredibly toxic exposome, external environment. Now, add low levels of physical activity into that. That's the second point you raised. And it makes things worse. And it makes things worse in two ways. Firstly, your average metropolitan sophisticate now, someone who drives a desk at work and then goes home and watches TV or their mobile or whatever, they're burning on average, maybe 2,000 kilocalories a day. That is an historical low point. One of my areas of research and key interest is looking at other cultures in other areas of the world and in other times. And perhaps the blue zone that I've been most associated with is an island not described spatially or geographically. It is, in fact, an island in time. It's the second half of the 19th century in England. So we have a time and a culture which documents itself in amazing detail, also photographically, because that's the beginning of the age of photography. So we know what these people looked like, we know what they ate, we know what diseases they died of, but then we know their life expectancy, we know all about them. And I can tell you that in an age before the internal combustion engine, before information technology, when people worked by the sweat of their backs, they worked with their backs and with their hands, men were burning up to 7,000 kilocalories a day. Now that's, for comparison's sake, that's almost like an Olympic athlete today. And you look at their musculature, we can tell that because we can look at the attachment sites of the muscles to their skeletons. When you look at their health records, I mean, they didn't get chronic degenerative disease, maybe a small amount, about 10% of what we see today. So they're living as long as we are from the age of 5. You've got to filter out prenatal or perinatal mortality. And they're healthier for far longer than we are. I mean, we can expect to spend the last 15% of our lives becoming progressively sicker, which is a slow, agonizing, and very expensive way to die. They were healthy almost until the last weeks or days of their lives. And then they had the decency to die very quickly, usually of infection, and therefore very inexpensively. So where we're spending almost 20% of US GDP on healthcare, they were spending less than a single percent, and they had, in general, better health than we do. Wow. So this is another way of re-examining what the entirely destructive role of the pharmaceutical industry has been on medical practice. They've led doctors down this primrose path of a pill for every ill, but that's not really the problem. The real problem is this chronic poisoning, which cannot be fixed with pills. So that's diet, that's exercise, and then you have this third wave, which makes everything worse, and this is cognitive offloading. And you and I, we talked a little bit about that.
Did.
And that's a lot of evidence now that the more you spend your time using the types of tools that are routinely available to everyone on their handsets or on their like Chromebooks that they take to school, the more you do of that cognitive offloading, that is, you're handing over investigative, analytical types of thought, and you're passing that off to an AI, you become less able to perform that type of mental activity. Now, the example that I mentioned to you is taxi drivers in London. That's 400 square miles of urban buildup. And to get a license to work as a London taxi driver, you have to know every street in those 400 square miles. You have to be able to navigate from A to B, wherever B is, wherever A is, without a map, and know the quickest way and the most efficient way of getting there. When you look at what this does to their brains, you can see that the area of the brain that's involved in spatial recognition and memory is actually grown. So the brain in some ways is like a muscle. You exercise it, and it grows. Now, conversely, if you're no longer memorizing maps and you're offloading that to Waze or Google Maps, that area of the brain simply doesn't develop. In fact, it probably atrophies to some extent. When we take that general case and look more specifically at analytical and critical thinking, again, if you don't practice it, the parts of the brain which are actually involved in provide the neurological base for this activity, I think they're probably going to atrophy as well. And now, before you cut me off, I have to go back to food because the diet that we're now eating has now been shown to degrade the functioning and the integrity of the hippocampus, which is a subcortical structure. Very important because it's one of those few areas in the brain where you continually grow new brain cells throughout your life. And you're repopulating the cortices, you're recreating new, young, and healthy and functional neurons, and that's part and parcel of being able to basically hold on to your cognitive facilities as you age. So We're offloading this cognitive analytical activity that is what makes us, puts the sapiens in Homo sapiens. And we're actually physically damaging the neurological structures at the same time, which underpin those types of mental activities.
Dr. Clayton, there's another dynamic I'm identifying too as you're speaking. With more cognitive offloading, that means that we're not getting the dopamine rush, which is the catalyst for children to learn when they get that dopamine rush, or when you get lost and you find your way back home if you're on a horse. I'm just kind of making these things up, these little anecdotes, but that dopamine rush when you figure out a complex problem, or when you do get lost, or when you finally achieve something that you've been working on for so hard, for so long, if you don't have that dopamine rush in the brain because of all your cognitive offloading, because ChatGPT just gave you the answer, so how can you get excited about that? Somebody else did your work for you. That also makes you more sedentary. So to me, it exacerbates the same problem, because you have no excitement or enthusiasm or motivation to even get up off the couch.
You're absolutely right. But there's a kind of a displacement that goes on here, because you and I, we probably get a dopamine rush from those moments when, like Stout Cortez on his peak in Darien, a new world swims into our ken. The dopamine rush, when your brain completes a pattern and you realize that's what it means. That's how this fits together. That, to me, is just heaven. That's the greatest rush I can think of. What the kids are doing, they're still getting that rush, but they're getting it from scrolling through TikTok.
Yeah, that's so sad
too.
They're
rewarded for that.
Yeah.
And those dopamine rushes come faster and faster, and I think you actually become addicted, and at the same time, in a rather unfortunate way, you become desensitized.
I was going to say that, yeah.
That's going on in the background as well. We've created an absolutely terrible environment for our kids, nutritionally, electronically. We're like those old Roadrunner films. We have run way off the edge of the cliff, and we're only now starting to look down.
Yeah,
so,
definitely.
While I applaud, the MAHA movement. I do think they're going in the right direction. I think that their hearts are in the right place. I'm not convinced that their heads are yet precisely in the right place.
And Dr. Clayton, I want to mention something on the MAHA movement, and I think you spoke of it already so eloquently, and I was able to see the picture instantly when you said removing additives isn't enough. And I'm thinking, with all of our foods, like for example, over the past decades, we take a good food and we remove the germ from wheat. We bleach things. We give our children juices without the orange, without the apple, without the plum, without the grape, without the cherry. We just give them the juice, which is missing all those micronutrients that our body needs. And then we replace all those really good nutrients that are all of those micronutrients and antioxidants that our bodies so desperately need with all this canola oil and seed oils and sugar and fat. And it makes sense. So they definitely are missing the mark. I'm hoping what he's doing is that, he's doing this in baby steps, but I tell you what, that could be replaced in 3.5 more years or 3 more years. And so I do agree with you that that's definitely not enough. One thing you and I talked about a few days ago when we met on the phone is, they discovered those footprints that you've shared that with me. And that's so demonstrative. Those footprints, I think that they found, I guess it was in Australia, and it was maybe 20,000 years ago. And it shows people were running at such a quick pace. These were hunters, and they were running in clay. And they found those footprints. And that shows us what our biological potential could be, which was 20,000 years ago. And our biological potential today is so drastically weakened when you compare that. And then you've got these tribes in Kenya that you were telling me about that run and run and run and run without stopping. And their stamina is phenomenal, and they're in high altitudes. And I love those words that you use. And when I was kind of doing some research on your background and what you've done in your life, but the biological potential, those are beautiful words. And I don't think most of us, 99.9% of us in our country at least, I don't think we realize what our biological potential is. We've not been allowed to discover our biological potential.
Sadly, I think that's true. And as adults, we make conscious choices, conscious up to a point, because we are affected by, the enormous amount of marketing that goes on. But we do make relatively conscious choices about what we choose to put into our shopping baskets, onto our tables, and into our mouths. The children, it's different. They have less freedom of maneuver. Their food choices are to an extent decided for them by other people, parents, teachers, school systems, or whatever. And I think that's very unfortunate. I think that we're creating a great social crime against ourselves and against our weakest members. To the point that, as you say, I think it's become extremely difficult to develop anything like your optimum biological potential, whatever that might be. That is something that I think is contributing to the current decline of life in the United States because, and I don't want to get too overtly political about this, the changes that I'm seeing in nutritional status and the way that affects brain function, it leads to, amongst other things, a loss of impulse control, which means more crimes of occasion. It leads to increased anxiety. It leads to increased depression. It leads to increased cognitive ability. It's actually degrading us, not only individually, but at the social level. And I don't wish to be a doomsayer about this, but when I look around me at culture in the United States, I see a fractured, unhappy, and increasingly dysfunctional culture. Now, I'm not going to be so reductionist as to say that all of this is a matter of our diet, but our diet is playing into this, and it's playing a significant role in these negative changes. But could I just come back to this concept of biological potential?
Yes.
I agree that we are not developing our potential in the way that we have done in previous ages. I don't see very many people around me now who would have the grit, the determination, the physical strength, and the resilience to trek right across the United States as they did in the settler trains when they went from the East Coast all the way to California. People can't do that anymore. But that kind of potential, that kind of resilience is still there. It's in our genetic code. And given the right environments, given a corrective course in terms of the way in which we eat, a lot of that can be and would be restored.
And the one thing that's lacking is that, the sharp contrast before and after. I wish so bad, I think of this Elon Musk Neuralink, which, believe me, I'm not an advocate at all about, but wouldn't it be nice to be able to have everybody's brains be able to sense their biological potential just in an instant, maybe for 2 minutes, so they could understand what they're living today, their current quality of life is so subpar and so pathetically and drastically below that threshold. If they could just taste it for 2 minutes, and sad to say that nobody understands what their biological potential is and what that feels like, because we've all been poisoned with our food supply. I mean, thy food is thy medicine, but it's got to be the right food, and it's got to be the clean food. And, you said something that's so important, Dr. Clayton, that quality of life. People say, oh, well, we're extending. We have a better longevity because of all our drugs and yada, yada, which I don't know. That's debatable. But let's just assume for an instance, if we've got another 10 years, so the average age is maybe 97 instead of 87 or 87 instead of 77. It doesn't matter. If you're sitting in a lazy boy for the last 15 years because you feel like crap, what good is that?
Oh, exactly. I mean, if I was offered another 10 years of life, but it was going to be drooling out of the corner of my mouth, sitting in the corner of a room in a wheelchair, who would want that? I think that I'm not interested in life extension. I am interested in health extension.
Yes.
And of course, if you get that right, life extension comes along as a side effect of that. Well, I think that the point is this. We know of other times, other cultures, and other small cultures which still exist today, which have approximately our lifespan, but where the frequency of heart disease, cancer, dementia is only about 10% of ours. And that tells you two things. It tells you that the vast burden of chronic ill health that affects us as individuals, as families, as social groups, and as a nation, the largest amount of that is avoidable.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have to ask yourself, well, if 100 years ago people were living such a perfectly healthy life, how did anybody get these diseases? Very simple. Talk to a cardiologist, an oncologist, or a neurogeriatrician and ask them, how many of your patients have strong genetic risk factors? The answer is always the same, about 10%. So back in the day, it was only the people who had these strong genetic risk factors that have ended up getting the problems. Everybody else was protected. That protection has been stripped away from us all, mostly by the major food multinational companies.
Mm-hmm.
And now that we understand that, and now that we understand really the machinery that underlies this shift and this impact on our health, we can rectify it. And that's what I'm currently doing in research and commercial projects in over 140 countries.
That in over 140 countries. Oh my gosh. And, I love your whole thesis to everything you're doing is to be proactive instead of reactive. And sadly, our healthcare system, and I can only speak for the United States, I'm sure many other countries follow the same system, but all we do is they make money the sicker you are. And that's the cold, hard truth. That is reactive. And it's all crisis centered. And, the big pharma industry, all the pharmacy manufacturers are pretty much the quarterback out there in the football field. They make the most money the sicker we are. And it's just, it is so sad. We need more people like that with the visionary and the intelligence that you have and the curiosity. I mean, that's something that's eroded as well. And of course, that goes along. We could talk for hours. Curiosity is everything. I mean, I can't tell you how much, you can tell from the tone of voice, I get all passionate about that word. That just seems to be dying. And with that curiosity, you said, what makes you a human being? Well, that's when you get excited, when you discover, you break that Rubik's Cube and you discover a solution to an enigma that you've been fighting for maybe weeks or months, or, you finish your race. You get lost in the woods. Me and my friends used to get lost in the woods all the time on our quarter horses. When we finally get out of the woods and got home, and of course, sometimes my dad would still lock up my saddle because it'd be dark and I'd get in trouble. But when you finally found the light, it's like, oh my God, that's where we live. That excitement, I just don't see that in the younger generation. And I love that you are so bold and so intelligent with these aspirations. And I know we didn't get a chance to talk about this, but I want to say this really quick. The importance of omegas is so important. And let me just kind of crack this in a nutshell real quick and tie a little bow around it because we are running out of time. But we are so overloaded on omega-6s and we are so sickly, pathetically deficient on omega-3s. And if we fix that one thing, that is really moving the needle in the right direction. Do you agree?
No.
Okay, tell me more. Okay. Did I say it backwards?
Well, no, it's just the problem is really very complex, and there isn't a single fix. The omega-3s are an important part. It's an important step for you to take on your road to better health. But here's the thing. Eating oily fish like herring, mackerel, salmon, things like that, that's clearly linked to better health. Drinking fish oil, whether it's from krill or Arctic salmon or wherever you get it from, doesn't really have much effect at all. And there's been study after study that shows that taking fish oil capsules, the kinds you'll get at Costco's or from Amazon, don't work. They just don't work. Yeah. And the reason for that is that there is a lot more in oily fish than you find in fish oil. Fish oil is very overly refined. They take a lot of the good stuff out, and you end up with just the omega-3s and, frankly, a whole lot of nothing. They don't work. You have to put certain things back in to make the fish oil do its thing. When you do that, and we've been doing that in Europe, what you find is you can switch off chronic inflammation in just about every tissue. There is one exception. And when you do that, because chronic inflammatory stress is so important in driving the chronic degenerative diseases, that the symptoms of these diseases, whether it's essential hypertension, whether it's asthma, whether it's psoriasis or arthritis, the symptoms of those conditions get less as the ratio of 6s and 3s and various other compounds in your body shift. And we have seen this now in hundreds of thousands of cases.
Wow.
Now,
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, Well, no, the medicine, my medical colleagues know all about anti-inflammatories. I mean, you can use corticosteroids, glucocorticoids, whatever you want to call them, or you use non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs. The problem is these drugs are toxic, not good to use long term. The approach that we have developed means that you can suppress chronic inflammatory stress for decades if you wish, and there are no adverse effects whatsoever because you're simply restoring natural metabolic balance, the kind that we used to have, almost all of us, until about 150 years ago.
There's something I want to mention, and I have learned too recently that a lot of these fish oils that you can buy, like I know the 3s are more important than 6s, but the one thing that I didn't mention in my very quick blurb that I said is that a lot of these oils that you buy on Amazon, Target, the big box retailers, the stability, and they oxidize within 4 hours, and it doesn't do your body any good. But there's a certain carrier, if you would talk about that, a certain carrier that extends the stability of the integrity of the omega-3 fish oil, which I believe is that olive oil?
Well, it's a compound that you find in olive oil called oleocanthal. Omega-3s are very fragile molecules. So they're produced in the oceans by the algae, the seaweeds, that are at the bottom of the marine food chains. And then they'll pass through 4, 5, maybe 6 trophic levels. They'll go through the gut, the tissue of the krill, then the pelagic fish, then the large fish, and finally the apex predator, which could be a killer whale or it could be your mom sitting down to eat a pickled herring. But you never find the omega-3s on their own. As they go through this long passage, they're always accompanied by the chaperone molecules that kept the omega-3s sweet while they were in the seaweed and migrate with them through the food chains, keeping them stable and keeping them safe from oxidation all the way through until the final consumer. So all we did, we identified what that chaperone compound was in the seaweed and then in the fish, and we simply put it back into the fish oil. It was a no-brainer.
That's amazing. And aren't you also an executive and a leader of a couple of companies that make products that have done this?
I advise a lot of different companies. My position is rather anomalous. It's very flattering. So I advise companies in the B2B sector, in the retail sector, in the food industry. But this particular fish oil is distributed through a multinational company called Zinzino.
And they produce a product, and that's up in Scandinavia somewhere. It's not around the United States, right?
No, you're right. It's the oil comes from Iceland. It's reconstituted in Norway, and it's done extremely carefully. I would not be associated with them if I was not completely satisfied.
Oh, I'm sure. I'm sure your standards are very high. Do they derive their oil, Zinzino, from the mackerel, herring, sardine, those fish? I think anchovies is the fourth one.
Well, yes, from small pelagic fish. You don't want to take fish from high up in the food chain because of bioaccumulation. Toxins accumulate as you go higher up the food chain. So you want small fish, and you want to fish them from waters that are relatively unpolluted in the first place. So most of that fishing takes place way down off the east coast of South America, where there's relatively less industry down there. And then there has to be a whole process of validation, and if necessary, cleaning, which is then done in Iceland.
Okay. This has been fascinating. We've just got a couple minutes. We've got to wrap up, Dr. Clayton, but I am so appreciative of you hopping on and being able to give us all this information. And you're right. I couldn't tell you how excited I was when we were talking on the phone the other day. And it's like, and it's sometimes so exasperating and frustrating for those of us that have the same passion and the aspiration to get people eating healthy again, to get people out running in the woods with their dogs and, maybe getting the sun on their face. And it's so frustrating because you feel like you're just swimming upstream without a paddle. 24/7. And every time you leave the house, society in general, the billboards, the culture, everything you touch, everything you see is going against that, going totally against that direction. And it's exasperating, but meeting people like you gives you the motivation to continue forward. And what I can say to our friends out there is, check into the Zinzino. Is that Zinzino? Zinzino.
Yep.
Okay.
That's correct.
Definitely check into that. I mean, and that's, that's a step in the right direction, but you still have to get off the couch and you still have to run and you still have to exercise and you still have to get off your phone and stop staring at somebody else's reality, which I say every Sunday night on my talk show, because it's such an evil thing and making us all very sick and full of anxiety and depressed and lonely and isolated and everything else. But Dr. Clayton, I would love to have you back on, and so that you can tell everybody about what you're doing. I appreciate it so much. Thank you. And you have a wonderful, wonderful week.
Thank you, and the same to you. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.
Straight Lines with Elizabeth.
Now, wasn't that incredible? I'm going to tell you his resume. Oh my gosh. Dr. Clayton is known for turning complex science into clear, practical solutions that improve brain health. Can I emphasize brain health, cognitive function? Have you ever heard Elizabeth Kaiser talk about cognitive function and critical thinking? Yeah, it's like that's all that girl talks about is the power of the brain and how AI is destroying the power of the brain. Okay. And also metabolic function and long-term wellness. So again, he is well deserving of a dissertation on his credentials. So make sure that you send this podcast and this Apple and the Spotify and wherever you get your podcast, YouTube, News Talk STL, wherever you get that podcast, share it with other people, because I want his word to permeate every household. When you're grabbing your coffee in the morning, when you're in the bathroom, play it on your phone while you're getting ready for work and you're putting your makeup on, while you're making your bed and fixing breakfast for the kids and feeding the dogs and filling up their water bowl and you're getting dinner out and trying to figure out what you're going to eat that evening. I tell you, wherever you're driving to, wherever you're going, in the office, wherever you're doing, make sure that you listen to this again and share it with your friends and family. His words need to permeate every mind, no matter what age. So I'm going to tell you a little bit more about him before we sign off for the evening. He's got a PhD in neuropharmacology and has served as the chair at the Royal Society of Medicine. Let me repeat that. The Royal Society of Medicine in London. He's a prolific author and educator and has authored multiple books that have shaped conversations on the global stage. And perfect timing for what just happened in D.C. with the Maha Summit. Yeah, definitely. They speak the same language. They definitely speak the same language. So his research, and I tell you what, that interview that you just heard with Dr. Clayton is just de minimis compared to what that man knows and his knowledge. I mean, I could sit and talk to him for 10 hours, 12 hours, 24 hours. I'm just like drinking from a fire hose when I talk to that man. I feel like a fish in water because I understand what he's saying because he's such an incredible teacher. He focuses on the cellular resilience and the membrane repair, which I cannot emphasize enough about membrane health, which is the gateway to the health of our cells. Think about mitochondria, the little powerhouse inside the cell, and how our metabolic health affects our mental health, and how proper nutrition can rapidly improve brain function and our cognitive capacity and our immunity and our emotional well-being. That's right. So he speaks all over the place and he's moving needles and he's not afraid to challenge the status quo. In fact, he loves to challenge the status quo because he's right. And there's not too many people that like to challenge the status quo. And who likes the status quo anyway? Has the status quo actually helped us in the last 40 years in the health of our American citizens? Can you answer that? Absolutely not. Status quo has not worked. So he is challenging the status quo in a big way, not just the United States, but Middle East, Russia, Scandinavia, UK. He is speaking everywhere. So I hope you enjoyed the interview with Dr. Paul Clayton. Make sure, again, share that with your friends and family. Grab that podcast and listen to it again. Wherever you're at, if you're in your car, if you're making coffee, if you're fixing breakfast, if you're feeding the dog, doesn't matter what you're doing. Just listen to that again because we all learn from repetition. And make sure that you understand what he's saying and then actually pull the trigger and do something about it and execute on what you just learned so that you can make your brain healthier in your entire body. So you have a good week. Stay off your phone. Stop looking at somebody else's reality. Take care. Be safe.
Straight Lines with